Baker dropped back to pass. Down the middle. Touchdown.
Simonson on his way into the end zone.
Swiz up the middle, turns the legs. He's in.
Throws to the back. He's got Wheaton on the crossing route. Touchdown, Beavers!
Talkin Beavers is presented by Wilson Motors.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome to Talkin Beavers, presented by Wilson Motors. This is Mike Parker, along with former Oregon State great Tim Ewis and the publisher of BeaverBlitz.com, Angie Machado. We welcome you to a show that we certainly felt would have a different tone than what we're about to express. Our thoughts about the game against Eastern Washington. And Tim, I'll start with you. Certainly, out of the gate, not the way that Coach Riley and the team and Beaver Nation and all of us, we certainly didn't expect it to start this way. A couple of days removed now, what's your overall take of what we saw unfold on that hot day at Reeser Saturday?
Well, I think a couple days removed, we're still as sick to our stomach as we were on Saturday afternoon. And, you know, you look at it, it truly was a three-phased game, and special teams was really not involved in it. Defense can play better. Offense had a great showing, and when you compile 1,152 yards of offense between the two teams, there really wasn't a lot of defense on the field to speak of. So, you know, Sean Mannion had a great showing. He proved that he was the #1 quarterback, and I think that's a great takeaway from that game.
Angie, you deal in the Lodge on your website, BeaverBlitz.com, a lot of interaction with fans. This one has been a hard take, something very difficult for all of us to sort of come to grips with and reconcile. But you, as the publisher of BeaverBlitz.com and a Beaver insider, just what are you taking away from this experience?
You know, I think the biggest thing has been coming on the heels of the Sac State loss 2 years ago. And I think there's so much kind of the angst of how can this happen 2 times in 25 months. The offense, like Tim said, though, the offense was better than expected. I think most times you see the Beaver defense, and they're the ones kind of carrying the team early. And this year, we started the season seeing the offense carrying the team.
I can disagree with that a little bit, though. I don't think it compares to the Sac State game at all. Just because the offense was rolling, and against Sac State, the whole
and a totally different team.
Spluttered, so,
I mean, Sacramento State is not a good team. Eastern Washington was a good team.
Yeah.
And there was a whole quarterback controversy in the Sacramento State game that clearly manifested itself early in that game. We're going to talk to Rashad Reynolds a little bit later in the show, and he, I think, will kind of put to rest the idea that this is somehow a repeat of 2 years ago. But when you talk about offense and defense in the game, we certainly saw a microcosm in the first quarter of the entire game in one stretch. Sean Mannion hits Connor Hamlet for a touchdown. The Beavers take the lead, one of 8 lead changes in the game. But on the ensuing possession, well, Coach Riley said the game's biggest play took place.
Well, you know, I don't think we were in great position to make plays. I don't think we tackled very well. I don't think we took advantage of some opportunities to, you know, get them off the field. You know, I think the thing started early in the game when we had them 3rd and 14, and we busted coverage, and they throw the ball deep down the middle of the field, just kind of a prayer, and nobody from our team is there. So I think it just started off kind of like that and got worse.
And we can see the play that Coach Riley was just alluding to. There's pressure coming off both edges, and as he did all day long, Tim, Vernon Adams eludes the rush, steps up, and 3rd down and 14, 49 yards later, Eastern Washington is off on another scoring drive, and that was typical of the day. Vernon Adams channeling his Russell Wilson. On that play, the Beavers are in their dime package. How does that happen?
You know, I look at that. It happened several times in the game, and I really thought the safeties were the strength of that defense, and it goes to prove just how much Jordan Poyer held that thing together last year. And you look at that play on that 3rd and 14. I also look at the big touchdown on the high post you know, on top of Ryan Murphy, essentially, and kind of spun him around on a double move, and that was a huge play that you just don't expect Oregon State DBs and safeties to give up those types of plays, and that's where I think the fans get a little frustrated. And, you know, as a spectator watching it, I get frustrated as well, because you've seen so much success in the past. You don't expect that out of the players right now this year.
And certainly, I think it's too early for there to be a sense of, it's 2 years ago, as we've already alluded to a bit. But the one thing that was somewhat disconcerting is, even in dime packages, and they tried a lot of different things, it seemed like no matter what Mark Banker and the defensive coaches threw at Vernon Adams, to his credit, that kid had an answer.
Oh, he was great. And, like we talked about a little earlier before the show, maybe they tried to do too much. Maybe Coach Banker was throwing too much, and the defense looked confused. They looked totally confused at times.
The thing I look at, I don't want to say they were throwing too much at them, because they played a lot of that nickel and dime last year, and a lot of those same guys out on the field. As far as it being too much, I think guys were just out of position. Guys were executing, and we'll take a look at some plays later on in the show where guys were executing what, the assignment they were supposed to do, just not doing it with the technique. And that's where I think they can make some of those changes. And all of Beaver Nation was, sputtering and talking about, we need to have better game time adjustments. Technique is one thing that is close to impossible to do a game time adjustment on, Mike.
Well, we've seen, and these coaches are very sound in what they teach and the techniques they teach, so I expect we'll see some huge fruits of that's coming up, and we'll talk more about it with the Beavers getting ready to play Hawaii. Quick question, just strategically. Were you amongst those, Tim, that felt, let them score, so you'll have time on the back end? That's, like they say in Jurassic Park, that suppresses 65 million years of gut instinct to do something like that, to let somebody score. Would you have let him score so Sean would have had time on the back end?
I would have, just because I was up with 150 other former players in the player lounge, and all of us are sitting there talking about what we would do in that situation. And yeah, you give your quarterback that has not been stopped all day a little more time. Now, really, the pass interference, had there not been a PI there, they kick a field goal, and we're off to the races trying to win the thing. So
Again, though, that gut instinct, that's a difficult thing to suppress. When we come back, Tim's already talked about some of the plays that we'll have a chance to take a look at from the Beavers' stunning loss to Eastern Washington. So Tim Ewis breaks it all down coming up next on Talkin Beavers, presented by Wilson Motors. Welcome back to Talkin Beavers, presented by Wilson Motors. It's time now for the Taco Bell Top 5.
Mike, you look at that top 5 right there. You got Derek Anderson, Jonathan Smith, Eric Wilhelm, Sean Mannion's increased his status to number 4 above Sean Canfield. And you look at 6,196 yards and really 2 seasons, because a half of each, essentially. And now he's got a lot of work ahead of him. But could he break Derek Anderson's?
I think he could, and certainly the game that he had this past Saturday, Tim, was clear that he's on his way to chasing down Big DA with that kind of game. Sean Mannion was magnificent.
Yeah, he really did look good. And, we want to take a look at a couple of his touchdown passes here and runs. Look at a couple things on offense that were good. Look at a couple things on defense that they could improve on, and maybe ways to improve. So first play we're going to take a look at here is with Connor Hamlet on the touchdown pass, his first pass of the game for the touchdown. We got a little play action here. Connor comes down in motion, and you see how he kind of freezes that linebacker right there and gets him to, as we said last week, bite the cheese, and he full buys in. Connor just turns his head, and he knows he's got 6. And they really took advantage of having a solid run game and Eastern Washington packing that box right there. He just spins him around. Beautiful job securing the ball, looking it in for all the young players out there, and then having a little fun celebrating. They should. You just scored a touchdown, you should have some fun in that celebration.
Tim, in the previous play, I thought Teron Ward had run a wheel route, clearing the area for Connor. Connor made a great catch, but again, I thought that pointed to Sean Mannion's decision-making, too. Yeah,
it really did, and he made great decisions, 37 for 43 on the day, and those are just phenomenal numbers when you look at that one. His previous record is 40 on, 66?
Right.
So, it is pretty solid numbers. What did you see, Angie?
Oh, I saw, just good decisions, and the thing that we talked about last week, I wanted to see him being able to check down, and he did. We saw him do the check downs to Storm Woods, and he threw it away one time when he was in trouble, didn't try to force balls, and took what the defense gave him.
And the Beavers, well, they went away from the run a little bit. The game situation and Mannion's hot hand dictated it. Storm had a good day, too.
Storm did have a great game. We're going to look at one of his touchdowns here, Mike. He ran the ball very hard. Off tackle, mid tackle, all over. Here we go. Here's the play we're looking at. Look at the push from the O-line and the tight ends, Mike. This is what they had all day, and this is what you'd expect against Eastern Washington. Look at the pile being pushed across the line. He's 4 yards deep into the end zone. That's what you have to do to a team like Eastern Washington, where you truly have them outmanned at the line of attack, especially with essentially a backup right tackle, a backup right guard, and a backup center playing. That's what I expected from the Oregon State Beavers. And, you know, Storm comes out with 2 rushing touchdowns, 68 yards on 16 carries. Very respectable first outing, Mike.
You know, he rushes for 4.3 yards per carry. Tim, what about, I mean, did the game dictate as much throwing as they did, or do you think that, you know, they could feature Storm even a little bit more behind that front running the football?
You know, you could have run a little bit more, but you look at the box, it was pretty packed in there with 6, 7, 8 guys all the time. 6, you know, when they were 3 and 4 wide, and 8 when they had 1 or 2 tight ends in the game, and they were playing 15 yards off at times on
and they're
Brandon,
playing from behind a lot of the game, so
they were. So you got to throw a little bit, and I'll take Cookie lining up against their guys any day of the week, Mike, running those 15-yard comebacks that he did so well.
Boy, I'll tell you, that was and not only, you know, the 2 passes, there were back-to-back passes to Cooks where Mannion showed his NFL Major League arm, hash marked the sideline left, hash marked the sideline right. Remember those back-to-back plays?
Yeah, right in the second quarter. Yeah. Real beautiful drive going down, and that's where I actually saw confidence in the Beavers. Then they come back. You're right, when you think we're going to turn the corner, they come back on defense. And so now we're going to take a look at a couple of the defensive plays, Mike. There's a couple that we have highlighted here. Right here, we got the 3-man rush. We have a blitz coming off the edge, and right here, the blitzer needs to go and attack that mesh hard, Mike. What does he do? He runs upfield, and the back can run right underneath him. And instead of a tackle for loss in the backfield, we have like a 28, 30, 40. He's still going. Tackle for 6 or a gain of almost 40, Mike. That's the difference on that play, and that's what I'm talking about, that technique of attacking the mesh point, listening to that coaching point, and really going right where you're supposed to be, or getting a little too antsy because you're on a blitz, Angie, and running upfield and letting the guy run underneath you.
That's right. And I think Tyreek was probably trying to keep his eyes on that quarterback, too, because we'd seen so much of him.
And that's learning how to defend that zone read, and it really is attacking the mesh. And I've seen him coached up on that in practice. So it's just, you know, being ready on game day, coming out and balling on game day. And that's what we got to see out of the Beavers this week against Hawaii.
And we saw, I mean, Tyreek Zimmerman, I mean, the call was right. You know, he's coming on a run blitz or whatever the case was, Tim, and he just over-pursued. Tried to do a little too much.
The scheme was there, 100%. Yeah. So we have another play we want to look at where the scheme was executed a little better here. And that can go to some of the, you know, the senior and junior leadership here. We got Scott Crichton on the end. And again, we have the zone read. Scott sits at home. Look at this. The quarterback shouldn't even keep it. He slips a little bit, but now you have Ryan Murphy running the alley right there. And it's a gain of 2 or 3, maybe should have been a tackle for loss even. So they're defending it properly. So it comes down to, once again, that technique, that assignment football in the zone read, Mike, filling every gap. And you look at it, again, 625 yards. It's tough to win with 625 yards of offense for your opponent.
Well, those numbers tell everything. There's no question about that. 625 yards. You know, again, I wonder, coming up, and we will talk a little bit more about Hawaii and the challenge that Taylor Graham will pose. But Graham at 6'5", 235, a little bit different than what Vernon Adams presented. And to that end, I think the Beaver defense will fare better. Vernon Adams was indeed special. Coming up on Beaver Game, on Talkin Beavers, presented by Wilson Motors, it's the Wilson Motors Game Balls. Angie, Tim, and yours truly each have a game ball to hand out. That's next on Talkin Beavers. It's time to determine who gets this week's Wilson Motors Game Balls. And we'll start first with the sure-handed Tim Ewis, former Oregon State tight end, former tight end in the National Football League. The tight ends were featured prominently. Who does your game ball go to?
Man, Mike, as much as I would love to give a game ball to a tight end, and Connor did play a great game, our boy Brandon Cookie, 13 for 196, 2 touchdowns. The way that guy was attacking the defense, coming back, snapping off those comeback routes, that guy can run some routes now. I mean, those were big-time NFL caliber routes. So I enjoy watching him play football, attacking defenders, sure-handed. And then the one bubble screen on the touchdown, I mean, he brought his own block to that thing. Mulaney had a great block for him, but we call that the BYOB, bring your own block, and he got himself into the end zone.
And how about the move that he made on Tevin McDonald on the right sideline? I mean, Cookie stopped, almost came to a complete stop.
He did.
McDonald whiffed,
he came,
and Cooks just reaccelerated. It was a thing of beauty. Yep. So Brandon Cooks, your game ball. It was a day for tight ends, but Angie, what do you got for us?
I am going to go with the offensive line. Just simply, I think they could have done a little better with run blocking, but I think at the end of the day, when you have Gavin Andrews out, so, Inger has to move over to an unfamiliar position. You have Roman Sapolu with his first start and redshirt freshman Josh Mitchell as center. I thought they did a great job. Sapolu was so athletic and going down and recovering that fumble that hit the ground. They got the game ball.
I agree with you. That was a great effort recovering that fumble on that drive.
But Mike, how about you?
Well, even with Connor Hamlet having the great day, I've got to go with a guy that I was excited to see step up and make 2 catches in key situations, and that's the sophomore tight end out of Kent Ridge High School, Kent, Washington, Caleb Smith. Now, I mean, here's Connor and Mannion having the games they had and not getting a Wilson Motors game ball. But, Tim, from the standpoint of somebody else in that tight end group making plays, I thought Caleb Smith's catches were really impressive. And
I agree with you, Mike. And the big thing on the one down towards the Valley Center end zone, Connor was out of the game. He was getting checked out by the trainers. He'd taken that shot on the high angle a couple plays before, and he was out. And Caleb kind of runs that little stick route, turns around, does a little pirouette, catches the ball. Once again, brings his own block, breaks a couple tackles, drags guys upfield. They call that knifing. I mean, just got vertical.
Yeah.
And I thought he was going to get in the end zone, but he did a great job. So I agree.
So Caleb Smith, his first game ball as a Beaver. Congratulations, the first of many, presented by Wilson Motors. Now, up next, the Beavers get ready for the University of Hawaii, and we've kind of, with the game balls, in a sense, transitioned to what's next and the challenge of the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. On the other side of the football, no game balls handed out. However, Rashad Reynolds, senior cornerback and captain, showed real leadership after the game in the locker room, addressing the team. And I had a chance to talk to Rashad today about the essence of that message.
Just to wrap it up in a nutshell, I just told him that this one game doesn't define us as a team. 2 years ago, I think we let that, when we lost Sac State, we let that really get to us. And as a leader on the team, I let the guys know that, each individual got to look inside yourself. Before you point fingers, look inside yourself. Because including myself, we got to play better. And that's as simple as that. And I told him that we could either go, one or two ways from that. We could either lay down and let it, destroy our whole season, or we can come together, work, and move on from it.
Rashad, that's emotional in nature, and in terms of the soul of the team, you're taking leadership from that standpoint about not letting the loss take you guys down. But just practical football, schematically, execution, the things you didn't do right against Eastern that you hope to do better this weekend. Take us through that a little bit, the football part of it.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is missed assignments, blown coverages. We can't do that. Linebackers, secondary, we all got to be on the same page. We got to talk out there with something we didn't do too much. Every great defense talks out there, as well as tackling. We tackle so poor. That was a poor output in the tackling. So we got to get our angles right when we run to the ball and make sure we finish through guys. And then on top of that, we got to just have fun. I don't think we have fun out there. For me, I know when I'm playing my best football, I'm having fun. So as a unit, we got to make sure that it's a game, but you still got to have fun out there.
And finally, Rashad, in terms of, people have talked about a lot of things. You just touched on it a little bit. Maybe not as up or as alive and having as much fun as you'd like. And people say, well, you looked hot in black uniforms, and trying to find reasons to account for the performance. What are your thoughts about all that kind of talk?
It's no reasons. It's us. Uniforms ain't have nothing to do with it. I'm sure there's other teams that won with black uniforms on, so that has nothing to do with it. It's about our performance on the field. Obviously, it wasn't where we wanted to be. It wasn't up to par, but we got to give it up to East Washington. They did their thing. We didn't. And that's something that we're going to move on from. We're done with that. And our mindset now is on Hawaii. No other game this week.
Rashad Reynolds touching on a number of important things. And, Angie, he used the word fun, that he plays better when he's having fun. And clearly early, when you could sense that things weren't going well, I'm not sure the guys were playing as fast and loose as they needed to be.
They weren't. I mean, Eastern Washington came out and they had that, you talk about swagger. They were having fun, and they were ready to let it all hang out. And Oregon State played tight. We played tight. You're not having fun. You're playing slow. And they looked like they were thinking. Tim.
Yeah, and I agree with Angie. One key word you said there was swagger, and that's something that some of my friends and I and former teammates have been talking about. You did lose with a guy like Jordan Poyer. Swagger. Jordan was good. He knew he was good, and there's a right way to have swagger. You don't have to Johnny Manziel it to have swagger. but you have to play with a confidence and an air about yourself. And that's what the Beavers are looking for, and I think that is what makes the game fun. You know, I have a couple ideas on it, Mike. I want to get your opinion. Opening games, we don't perform well. That's why I'm looking forward to Hawaii. Traditionally, that first game is a tough matchup because we don't have any scout film. Last year we had scout film against Wisconsin.
I remember it was the everlasting camp last year. We kept pushing back the opener, and eventually against Wisconsin, a much different kind of team, granted, than Eastern Washington. They did play with speed and passion and tremendous defense. So, you know, the opponent, everything worked against the Beavers in a lot of ways to have the kind of game they wanted to. But I expect that with Hawaii coming, we're going to talk more, in fact, now about the next matchup for the Beavers coming up Saturday, 5:07 against the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors, and they are the Rainbow Warriors. Again, they've gone through a lot of different variations on it with the Warriors, the Rainbow Warriors, just the Warriors. They're the Rainbow Warriors. They're coming. We're going to find out more about them as we continue. That's coming up next on Talkin Beavers. And welcome back to Talkin Beavers. About midway through the show in the first half, we looked back a bit with head coach Mike Riley talking about, in his opinion, and I share it, the biggest play of the game in microcosm. Beavers score a touchdown, but then Eastern Washington comes back and hits a 3rd and 14 for 49 yards. We heard Coach Riley on that. Tim Ewis has broken down some of the big plays on both sides of the ball. Captain Rashad Reynolds talked about not letting this game in any way sap the Beavers team confidence going forward against the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors Saturday at 5:07. Now, speaking of Hawaii, it is time now for our standard TV and appliance rewind as we look back at the last time the Rainbow Warriors and the Beavers met. It was at Reser Stadium in September of 2008. And the Beavers had a tremendous football game from start to finish, as we can see on the opening kickoff, with James Rogers doing his exciting thing, Lyle Moivau having a big day. I remember, Angie, what do you remember most about that day?
I remember Jaquiz having a breakout game. I mean, that was Jaquiz's coming out party, if you will.
And there was his elder brother, James, scoring a touchdown. And you're right about Jaquiz Rogers. Lyle Moivau and Mike Riley celebrating the 45-7 victory. But as we can see, amongst the many things that happened in that game, Tim, Jaquiz, 26 carries, 110 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. His first 100-yard game. The previous week, he'd rushed for 99 against Penn State. And that Penn State loss was 45-14 and didn't feel good. But I thought the Beavers found their running back at Penn State, and he proved that against Hawaii.
Mike, I was in the press box at Penn State. Nothing about that game felt good.
No, I know. But Quiz did rush for 99.
Quiz rushed well. This game was a lot more fun to be in the coach's booth for, and
I bet.
You know, you kind of felt like you had it in hand the whole time. And Quiz came out, kind of had his coming out party. James had a great game himself, as a returner and as receiver. But the one key thing about that game that makes it so special is Lyle Moivau. And he's, you know, the Hawaiian heritage, playing the Hawaiian team, and that's always a big game for the Polynesians at Oregon State.
And, Angie, you know that well, and you know about all the recruiting that the Beavers have done there through the years. This is an important game for Oregon State playing Hawaii.
Oh, it's huge. And you get the guys, their family members come from Hawaii to come watch the game. They recruit there to be able to say, we're going to play. You know, you're going to be able to play where your family can see you. It's huge.
Yeah, and we're expecting a great opportunity for the Beavers to bounce back. And we had a chance, in fact, to talk to head coach Mike Riley about what it's going to take for the Beavers to kind of expunge the bad feelings that may still linger. We talked to Coach Riley after practice today about preparing for the Rainbow Warriors.
Well, it all turns into the specifics of what Hawaii does, you know. So you prepare for what they do and who they're doing it with. So that's how every week changes, basically, and then we try to gain more and more confidence throughout the week.
Coach, talk a little bit about Hawaii, Coach, just what you've learned so far from watching the USC tape.
Well, first of all, defensively, I thought that they were outstanding. You know, they really made it hard for SC to have any rhythm whatsoever. I think SC was 3 for 14 on 3rd down, and the points they got on offense, which was 23, were very hard to come by. So, you know, they're very disruptive. They they don't want you to run, so they really commit themselves to that, and they play a lot of good, tight man-to-man coverage. They have good, experienced secondary people. You know, and then offensively, they're multiple. Norm Chow, scary. You know, all the parts there you have to be aware of. Norm is the master of balance and action passes, and so you know it's a good football team. It's a good-looking team.
Coach Riley invoking the name of Norm Chow, and that's about all you need to hear, Tim, to know that you're going up against a very resourceful, versatile offense. Mark Banker, the defensive coordinator, said that they've mixed in some pistol look with some of their West Coast offense and pro-style approach. It'll be a different-looking team than Eastern Washington, and I think in that sense more congenial to the Beavers in their defensive approach. But Norm Chow knows what he's doing in offense.
He definitely does, Mike. And when you say different, I still say it's going to be a little bit of the same. Where Eastern Washington played pistol, they played offset back, they played pro formations, they played all kinds of things, and that's one of the beauties about playing a team like that. I think you get another great opportunity against Hawaii. They're going to have multiple formations, multiple sets, and I'm curious to see what the strength of that offense really is, because against USC, let's be honest, they struggled. They were probably outmanned with USC's defense, but they really couldn't put any type of drive together in that game.
And Taylor Graham, a huge quarterback, and this is how, as I mentioned earlier, he's different. He's 6'5", 235, Angie. Traditionally, Beaver defenses perform better against quarterbacks like that, but he's got a big arm, and he was originally recruited by Ohio State and committed there and began his career. That's enough. That's all you need to know the kid's got talent.
But Oregon State, this is the type of offense that they should build their confidence back up against. Taylor Graham's not going to bust out Vernon Adams style and take off running. Right. And if he does, then there's bigger issues.
It reminds me of when Osweiler was running the zone read at Arizona State a couple years ago, and he might have kept it once a game. You just don't want a 6'8" guy running down the field with a football. So I'm not as concerned about that. I'm on track with Angie. The defense is where I'm a little more concerned about. And you got the defensive line, Mike. That Polynesian-based defensive line is always good. They're big, thick. I call them cankle guys. You know, their legs are just stout. And those guys, going in, I hope Isaac Seumalo is ready. I know he's practiced this week, and he's planning to play in the game. So that will really help to stout up our offensive line for those defenders.
Their linebackers were so aggressive. I watched that USC game, and they were swarming to the ball and just all over the field.
Yeah, no, they had 9 tackles for loss, 3 sacks in the game, held USC to 364 yards of total offense, and as Coach Riley said, the third down conversions just 3 of 14. So while in theory the Beavers are getting an offense and an approach that may help them find their legs defensively, I think on the other side of the football, Sean Mannion and Isaac Seumalo returning and company will find some stiffer challenges on the defensive side. We will continue with Talkin Beavers a little bit more on the Beavers getting ready for the challenge against Hawaii, but what's after the Rainbow Warriors? That's coming up. We welcome you back to Talkin Beavers, indeed presented by Wilson Motors. As we take a look at the rest of the 2013 season, there is a rest of the season. Now, you understand that Hawaii's coming in, then the Beavers go to Utah, and then go to San Diego State, and the rest of the schedule, in spite of what I know feels a bit of a catastrophic loss to Eastern Washington, there's a lot of season left. And as we've seen, Angie, through the years, Coach Riley's teams, now last year they got out 6-0, and there was all kinds of talk about 7-0 and all of that, I know, making a lot of people nervous, including yours truly. I remember saying they just hope, be 1-0 coming out. So now they got to work at being 1-1, and that's the most important thing. But beyond that, then they go to Utah and San Diego State. How do you see the next 3 games in terms of the conference season starting and 2 more out-of-conference games?
Well, like we talked about last week, you have to look at the game ahead. So Hawaii is tough, and right now the Beavers just need to build the confidence. They need to, tackle. They need to wrap up. They need to stop Hawaii. But Utah on the road. You start your conference on the road at Utah. Kind of struggled some, their first game out of the chute against Utah State. But winnable game. But it's a 7 o'clock game, high altitude. Dennis Erickson back ready to air things out. But, you know, like I said, Beavers need to start there. San Diego State struggling a little bit. They lost to an FCS opponent this past weekend as well. So.
Well, and therein is the point that, Tim, these FCS games and the FCS schools stood proud over this opening college weekend. The gap has closed a lot. There's great athletes and talent. We saw that in the Eastern Washington game. But the next 3 games, you know, for all the talk of 7-0 and all of that, I think the Beavers can get to 3-1. It starts this weekend, and there's no other game except Hawaii. But the 3-1 is achievable.
I agree 100%, Mike. To me, what it's going to come down to is rushing the football. I wrote about it on my blog this week. You can check that out on csnnw.com. And really, what it's talking about is the probability of winning the football game when you rush for 150 yards or more. And what do we see? Quiz breaking the 100-yard mark, and there's probably other few pile of yards in there. And when you go above that number, you have a higher chance of winning the game as a team. And so or keeping the defender, whoever you're defending, under that number as well. So
and it takes the clock.
Yeah.
And you eat the clock, and
you eat the clock up. You don't let Hawaii rush the football.
Yeah, we're saying all of this coming off Mannion's brilliance and throwing for 422 yards and the great protection and no sacks.
You take what they give to you, Mike. So
exactly.
That's the other side of it.
You play the game you're in, as Mike Riley always says. But I agree with you. I think philosophically, you'll see the Beavers commit against Hawaii. They may need to more and be more balanced. But I expect what we saw earlier, Jaquez 26 for 110 when Hawaii last came here. I'm sure Storm Woods would like to take those same kind of numbers, maybe even have a few more yards than that. We'll see how that all plays out. Now, we talk about the great running backs at Oregon State, and there have been many that we've been blessed to see. For all of the angst that we're all dealing with following that tough loss to Eastern Washington, Angie, you have filed a story on BeaverBlitz.com. You've even talked to the young man. There was a young man on an official visit this past Saturday who didn't necessarily have the same view that everybody sort of aghast in Beaver Nation did. He had a great time.
No, it's interesting. You know, Squally Canada, running back out of Milpitas, California.
Squally
His
Canada?
name is Squally Canada.
Milpitas. Jeff Cruz Camp.
Wow. Yeah.
So, you know, I talked to him Sunday after his official visit, and, you know, Beavers have this, you know, fans are on our site just wringing their hands about this loss. And I asked him, I said, you know, what about, you know, and he loved his trip. In fact, he's planning an unofficial later in the year because he loved it so much. He loved the game. He said that was his highlight of the whole thing, was the game. And I said, what about the loss? Did that affect you? And he said, no, I'm a football player, and I could identify in the locker room. You know, I've been there. And he, like I said, loved everything about it. He loved the coaches, the fact that they told him, go ahead and take some trips. This is a young man who was committed to another school. When he said he was going to take a trip, they told him he would no longer have a scholarship, so he decommitted from that school. He is being pursued by several Pac-12 programs, and the loss didn't affect him at all.
Squally.
Squally.
Squally
and
Canada.
Storm.
How about Storm and Squally in the same backfield? I kind of like it. We'll see, perhaps. That's the young man still has some other things to, visits to make and things to consider. But it's good to know, I think, in the midst of all of this, that one young man still had a great experience, as so many recruits do when making their official and unofficial visits to the beautiful OSU campus. Now, Hawaii comes to town this weekend, Reser Stadium, 5:07 kick, and everyone will be waiting to see if the Beaver defense has made some adjustments to slow the Rainbow Warriors down and get the Beavers on track. One of the coaches who has helped the Beavers immensely in his second year now, longtime NFL veteran Pro Bowler, player, and a guy that's imparted so much wisdom to the Beaver defense. He's hard at work to do that. This week, we get to know Coach Rod Perry. Talkin Beavers, presented by Wilson Motors. Mike Parker along with Tim Ewis and Angie Machado. And Tim recently had an opportunity to sit down with one of the great minds in the game of football. This was a guy that when Mike Riley had an opening on his staff a couple of years ago, Mike said he had one guy in mind. He didn't think he could get him, but he placed the phone call, and what do you know? Rod Perry, a great secondary coach, said yes to Mike Riley, and Tim had a chance to find out a little bit more about what makes Rod Perry such a successful coach.
Talk about your relationship with Coach Riley and how far that dates back to.
Yeah, that dates back to 1999, I believe, or 2000 when he first came to the Chargers. I'm not sure what date that was, what year. That's when I first met him.
So when Coach Riley reached out to you about the secondary, position here. What attracted you to come to work for him in Corvallis?
He hit me at the right time, and I thought more and more I thought about it, and I thought it would be pretty cool to come back to college and be able to get back to college, be able to help young men grow both on and off the field. So I got more and more excited about it, and it was the right time for me.
Philosophically, have you seen changes in his football X's and O's?
No, he's not. He's always been very aggressive in terms of offensively throwing the football, and he is a former defensive back, so he has a very good knowledge over the secondary and defense, and he's coached special teams, so his philosophy remains the same. He's a very aggressive coach and believes in technique and teaching.
On the defensive side, he used to just be, you know, 4-down linemen, pinning their ears back, running upfield every play, and that's changed as well. You saw a lot more of that nickel and dime package last year.
Yeah.
And what was the integration?
I think Mark likes that philosophy because we did that at San Diego together. So that was some of the package we ran there. We ran 4-down linemen. He has a background in that. So I think Mark is excited about doing that. And he probably something he's always wanted to do.
Well, Rod Perry, as you can see, has been at this for a while. 23 years in the National Football League. In his second season with the Beavers, he has 2 of his sons working with him on the staff as undergraduate intern and staff assistants and so on who are learning the trade. So Coach Riley wasn't sure whether or not he'd be able to get a yes from Rod Perry, but is delighted that he did, Angie, because it's the family atmosphere at Oregon State is such that Rod is hired but says to Coach Riley, I'd like to bring my sons with me. They're on the sideline working as part of their craft to become great coaches. So it's a perfect fit at Oregon State.
It's a great fit for Coach Perry and the Beavers because he brings so much knowledge. He bringing in the nickel and the dime package that he talks about, that, just being able to add those years, that that treasure chest of football knowledge, and then recruiting. I didn't honestly know how he would react on the recruiting trail, but so many players last year. I mean, one of the top cornerbacks, DBs in the nation, had Oregon State down in like the top 3 come signing day, chose to go to Oklahoma, but all along it was because of Coach Rod Perry that he stayed in there.
Tim, one of the things that I'm impressed with in your conversation with Coach Perry, you talked about his relationship with Mike Riley, but he also has known Coach Banker for a long time. And I asked Mark when Rod was first hired, sometimes in this ego-driven business, there can be a sense of, well, Rod Perry coming all these years in the National Football League. Right now, all of the defensive coaches, particularly this week, but Coach Banker loves Rod Perry. They have similar philosophies, and they're helping each other a lot. When
those philosophies mesh, that's the perfect kind of network of coaching, and that's what Coach Riley always looks to establish, is guys that will fit in with his philosophy, what he teaches and what he coaches. And with Rod, you got a guy that has experience. Therefore, he knows how to teach football because he's been around it long enough. And the killer point for me is the guys trust him. They listen to everything he says. And you got a guy like James Dockery that's incredibly active on Twitter, former cornerback at Oregon State, and he'll still refer to Oregon State as cornerback U. And a guy like Doc says they just got to keep trusting Coach Perry. He knows what he's talking about. Doc didn't even play for him. He just knows his reputation.
They came back and worked out in the summer, and they were picking their brains, trying to hear what Coach Perry had to say.
There is no question that the defense, very good hands with Rod Perry and Jose Amalo, who played at Hawaii. He's going to be excited about the opportunity to defeat and be part of a game plan that will help the Beavers get to 1-1 and moving on from there. So our thanks to Coach Perry for the sit-down with Tim Ewis. Jack Palance said there's one thing. I don't remember it from what the one thing was in City Slickers, but Tim has one thing, Angie has one thing. I have one thing that the Beavers need to do to defeat Hawaii. And thank you for joining us on Talkin Beavers, presented by Wilson Motors. I referenced Jack Palance and City Slickers and one thing. I can't even remember what the one thing he said was in the film. But, Angie, if there's one thing... By the way, have you seen City Slickers?
I have.
Pretty funny, right?
Great movie.
I like when they do the wave. No, that's a Harry Met Sally. You get those Billy
favorite.
Crystal, Bruno Kirby films. They're easy to mix up. But what's the one thing, in your opinion, that the Beavers need to do to win this football game?
Tackle. Okay, kidding aside, run the ball. They need to establish a run, establish it early, and get Storm those yards. And, you know, like Tim, in your blog today on ComcastSportsNorthwest.com, when the Beavers can run over 150 yards, it's pretty much a win.
Tim, do you see it that way? I mean, is that the one thing? What's your one thing?
You know, I learned that principle from Coach Dan Cazzetta, who's now up at University of Washington. But what I also learned was the 4 rules of football: run, do what you're coached to do it every time the best you can, and pick up your teammate at the end of a run. And if not necessarily the end of a run, but on a tackle, on a big play, if the defense gets out there and has that swagger and picks somebody up at the end of a big play or the end of a big run on the way to that 150, that's the key to me, is having that swagger, finding that back in black Oregon State mentality.
But does it take a play? How do you get the swagger back? Don't you have to make a play and tackle somebody and make a big play to get the swagger, or do you have to have the swagger to make the big play?
As soon as you make that first play, Mike, the swagger starts, and somebody gets up and we'd say party in the end zone. Steven Jackson, he's going to get in. We're going to party in the end zone. And as soon as you get that mentality of party in the end zone, party on the ball carrier, party wherever, man, we're going to have fun doing it. That's the swagger, and that's the mentality that when the Beavers find that again, they're going to be successful. And as I said earlier, that's not the Johnny Manziel swagger. That's not the, you know, self-promoting swagger. That's the we're having fun out here, Rashad Reynolds swagger.
The shimmy. Remember the old shimmy and the pat downs and all that? I mean, that was that. The Beavers were having fun, and they were playing like they were having fun.
The word, and whoever thought that after the game we just experienced that we'd be talking about fun, but that's the whole key. I think you're both touching on it. Rashad Reynolds touched on it. They need to play, I think, with a little less anxiety this weekend, and I think they're going to be given a game plan on both sides of the ball that's going to contribute to that. And swagger, whatever you want to call it, my one thing is simply what the one word Rashad Reynolds used. We need to have fun out there. So however they can get to fun, I think that's going to be a key to the Beavers getting to 1-1 on the year. And it's a big weekend coming up. We already talked about the great matchup between the two states and the two schools, but a lot of young people visiting the campus, Angie.
Yeah, lots. There's several, even coming as far away as from Texas. One commit is coming, and a couple other nice receiver. So some big names coming in.
And that's changed in Coach Riley's philosophy. He never liked to bring guys in on game day, but because of the new Research Stadium, the new Parker Plaza, the May shipping truck out in front with all the guys' pictures on it, all those great things, he wants them to see that and see what Beaver Nation is all about.
And so that's the key, I think, for everybody. The fun, the fact that Squally had a great time here, even with the experience last week. I think a lot of people visiting the campus are going to enjoy their experience at Research Stadium. We hope that you'll be part of it, too, and get back, kind of get fired back up again, one game into a long season. And the Beavers look to bounce back this weekend against the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors at 5:07. And one thing is certain, we will be back again next week to talk about it. Remember, coming up Friday, #Beavers Football live across from Research Stadium, and we'll be talking about Hawaii as well as the Pac-12 beginning in Salt Lake City the following weekend.